So thank you everyone for joining us tonight for Record Keeping for Production Management, part 1 of our 3-part series, defining your goals, keeping records to make the best breeding decisions for your herd. I'm Cindy Fortier. I'm a research and innovation coordinator for the BCRC, and I will be your moderator this evening. We are very happy to put on these webinars free of charge through the Knowledge Dissemination and Technology Transfer Project funded by the Canadian Beef Cattle Checkoff and Canada's Beef Science Cluster. So we ask that you please submit questions through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. It looks a little something like that. And then these questions will be addressed live in the Q&A after our presenters have finished presenting. So we ask that you please don't use the chat function because it can get a little bit chaotic and it's just easier for us to track them that way. This webinar is being recorded and a link to the recording will be sent to all those who have registered, even those who are unable to attend live. This webinar is also available for CE accreditation. So you can also still receive CE credits for previous webinars by watching the recording of select webinars and receiving 70% or higher on the associated quiz. So attending live means you automatically qualify for your CE credit. So watch your inbox over the next few days for your certificate. And if you have any questions regarding CE accreditation, or if you haven't received your certificate after a week's time, please contact myself or Dana Parker with the BCRC. So in the spirit of record keeping, if you're curious about which areas your operation is excelling, which might need some work, or you're interested in record keeping but not sure where to start, check out the BCRC's record keeping and benchmarking resource. It's broken down into 3 levels of increasing complexity and breaks down the what, when, and how of animal health and production, forage and grazing, genetics, and financial record keeping. So whether you're new to record keeping or looking to take it to the next level, there's something there for everyone. And this is on beefresearch.ca. And while you're there, we also have a bunch of interactive tools and calculators. So a good record keeping system helps take the guesswork out of management decisions, and BCRC's tools allow you to use these records to help guide informed decision making and potentially identify ways to improve productivity and profitability. There are a variety of tools on our website that highlight topics from feed management to calving distribution and everything in between. So head over to beefresearch.ca and check them out. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers this evening. So first we have Kathy Larson. Kathy Larson completed both her undergrad and master's degree in agricultural economics at the University of Saskatchewan, where she is now a research associate in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics. Prior to joining the U of S in 2018, she was the beef economist for the Western Beef Development Center for 8 years. Her research and extension interests include the cost of production, the adoption rates of management and marketing practices among cow-calf producers, the value of record keeping, and the economic impact of leafy spurge. She collaborates with researchers from a variety of institutions and provides economic analysis of practices and technologies for their respective studies. Current collaborations include researchers with the Department of Animal Science, Department of Plant Science, Western College of Vet Med, Lakeland College, and the University of Calgary. Originally from a beef and grain farm near Francis in southwestern Saskatchewan, Kathy now calls Prince Albert home in her spare time. She enjoys camping and fishing with her husband and son. The second speaker we will hear from tonight is Wilco van Meijl, who is a partner and owner of South Valley Farms, a mixed operation in Rapid City, Manitoba that calves approximately 400 cows. Wilco also works off the farm, having spent the last 7 years at Farm Credit Canada, and before FCC, he worked at Cargill for just under a decade. He is the proud father of 3 children that keep him busy with their activities, and being a 4-H alumni, he is incredibly happy to see his kids getting the same great 4-H experience he enjoyed. In 2016, Wilco was selected as a finalist in the prestigious Canadian Cattle Young Leaders Program and completed a mentorship focused on marketing strategies for cow-calf operations. So without further ado, I am going to invite Kathy to share her screen and kick off the webinar.
All right, let me get started here. And ta-da, how's that looking?
Looks great.
All right, thanks for the confirmation there, Sydney. Hi everyone, how's everyone doing? I can't see any of you, so you can hopefully you can smile or have a little bit of a laugh. Such a weird world that we find ourselves in. I'm happy to be here tonight talking to everybody about records that you can use for heifer selection and culling decisions. And I would call both of those informed decisions. And so before I get into my slides, we have some polling questions. And so Sydney's going to load those up for you. There's 5 little short questions, sort of yes, no, or multiple choice ones for you to partake in. Answer away. They should start showing up on your screen. And just going to close those out from my screen here and let you guys all have a chance to answer them. And Sydney, are you able to poll there as people are answering them? You're able to see what responses are coming in?
Yep, I can see it. It doesn't, oh yeah, we're just getting our first couple of respondents in right now, Kathy.
Perfect. Yeah, I don't see that on my end. So we'll let you go through it. They're essentially, I'm asking questions because I'm speaking on this topic. I really want to have a sense of your reliance on data to make some of your decisions. What are some of your criteria? I'll be touching on that in my presentation. I want to know what maybe you're doing ahead of my points being made. What is guiding your choices for heifer selection and culling? And then we'll take a look at that. What is it looking like on your end, Sydney?
Yeah, the responses are still coming in pretty hot.
Okay.
So just let me know when you'd like to continue and
Okay.
I can.
All right, we'll give it another few seconds and I say pause it, let's move on. I don't know if are you able to show what the results are?
Yep, I'm sharing the results now. Can you see them?
Yeah, if I pull that onto my screen, do you see them, Sydney, or like does everybody see it?
No.
Okay.
Everyone
So
should be seeing it from their screen though.
from their end? Okay. Yeah. So not surprisingly, probably some of the folks that are joining here tonight, those of you that are producers, we're at about 70% are relying on data and notes to make replacement selections. On the culling side, a little bit higher at 84% have some sort of data or notes that you've been taking when you're deciding who to cull. In terms of the top criteria, so you could pick up to 3 from a list of criteria. What do you really, the ones that got the most votes was the dam, the mother, the conformation of that heifer, and her temperament. So interesting there. So yeah, just some folks, you don't want to be dealing temperament gets the most votes. So just how the disposition of that animal. When it comes to after you get past who is open and who's a dry cow, didn't bring you a calf in the fall, what are the top criteria for culling? We have the top one being just the calf's performance, that cow's calf at weaning, followed by temperament again and age. 4th on the list was confirmation. And then last question, do you keep a cull list? And 80% of you indicated that you do so. So thanks very much for that. And I'll now move into the comments in my the rest of my presentation. So thanks so much for your polling right off the bat. a little bit, I think it was alluded to in what Sydney had shared in my bio. What I have for a background is I've worked a lot with producers on cost of production. I'm currently aligned as part of the provincial coordinator for the Canadian Cost of Production Network. And, you know, when we look at cost of production, you see a little basic equation here. I'll be working with producers on taking their herd costs and dividing it by their total pounds of calf wean, so summation of all their wean weights to get their break-even price, or we call that a unit cost of production. So it's just a break-even on their calves. When with such thin margins that exist in the cow-calf industry, we're working with producers like, what can you do to improve your bottom line and reduce that break-even price? I think we've done lots to try and narrow down our costs that we could maybe chip away at, but how about finding ways to increase that denominator? And maybe some of you have heard me say this before. What measures can you be looking at to assess your productivity? And it's lots of these production indicators: your open rate, your calving span, your calving distribution, your wean rate. Well, to do any analysis of those indicators, you're going to need to have production records. So that's a lot of where my interest comes from, in getting producers comfortable in tracking those numbers and benchmarking themselves, and taking a look at how their production performance is lining up so that they can find ways to improve it and improve their profitability and their bottom line. I'm currently teaching a course right now on management at the university, and within the management literature, we talk about how there's both low and high involvement decisions. So important decisions are those that can have really long lasting impacts. And I would argue, and hopefully you would agree with me, that something like heifer selection, picking who's going to be the next cohort of dams in your herd, is an important decision to be made, and it has long-lasting impacts. So we say that those are high involvement decisions. So when you have a high involvement decision, it's really recommended that you're using evidence or data to make that decision. And so it was good to see that, you know, everybody was saying that you're like a strong proportion of the respondents here at the poll said, yeah, you know, I'm relying on some sort of data to make that decision. So evidence-based decision making is important when you're making those really key decisions. So when it comes to criteria for heifer selection and culling, what are we thinking about as important? So first off, I would say that from the industry surveys that we've carried out in recent years across Canada, we are very well aware that producers are collecting records of some type. And you can see from some of the percentages showing on this that a lot of producers still have that comfort in probably the calving pocketbook at these high amounts of paper records that we see throughout Eastern Canada measures here. From the Western Canadian cow-calf survey, we are starting to see, you know, moderate use of computer records. I would make the comment that electronic records make it a lot easier to analyze them and refer to when they're in an electronic format versus a paper. One of the top records that I think is worth keeping is just an individual animal ID. So signing every animal its individual ID. And for some of you that might seem like, well, that everybody knows that, but not necessarily. This is maybe a pullover using the alphanumeric management tag is something from the purebred realm of things. And I grew up on a purebred operation. So every animal has this electronic RFID, the button tag of 15 numbers. That's maybe a little long to remember. So we moved this alphanumeric system with a dangle tag in the ear. So, you know, this year, all the calves are going to have the letter L as a component of the tag in its ear. I'll show you a visual example in a second here. Why would you do that? Well, having an individual ID allows you to track your individual female's performance. So you can track all the calves under her throughout her performance and each year, her progeny performance, and make decisions based on that. So here's a photo from days gone by back in 2015. This is a heifer calf from Western Beef. And you can see here, she does have the button tag in the one ear, and then in her other ear is a management tag. That takes a bit of time. I realize this is someone having to put that ink on there or use a Dremel drill to mark it up, but you see a few different things on here. The first bit is the brand. It was TF, backward F is Termunde Ranch. So Western Beefs was operating out of Termunde Ranch, and so the brand was T backward F. And then you see a C291. So I know from that that is the letter year C corresponds with being born in 2015. And we use also a system where male calves were given the number 1 through 150, and any heifers were coded 200 and above. So I know this is a heifer by looking at this tag. Obviously, if I could see the full photo, I know anatomically that it was a heifer as well. And then I have a bit on the bottom here about the dam. So the dam for this heifer is 374W. So was a 6-year-old cow that gave birth to this heifer calf. Now, so beyond individual ID, what do we know about needed replacement heifer selection in a given herd? So from data from the Canadian Cost of Production Network that's led by CanFax, and again, I'm a provincial coordinator for that network, we have data collected from operations all across Canada. We know that on average, culling rate is about 11%. And cow death loss is 1.5%. So if we add those two together, we're at 12, just under 13% retention rate required. And on average, across the herds that participate in that network, our wean rate is 89%. So I'll just give you a quick little example here. If you had 100 cows, because you have this wean rate of 89%, I know that I'm going to wean about 89 calves. I'll make the easy assumption that half are going to be heifers, or 45. And at a minimum, I'm going to need 13% or 13 females to replace the cows that'll be leaving the herd due to being culled or death loss. But then in addition to that, I'm going to have to make some adjustments. I'm obviously going to have to keep more than that because not all of them are going to conceive. So I'm going to have to inflate that a bit based on my expected conception rate. Maybe I have some hard, fast rules about what cycle those heifers are catch in, and I won't maybe keep some of the ones that are caught late. And there could be other factors that that's influencing how many heifers you end up keeping. Some folks might have the ability to keep more than they need and have a little side hustle where they're selling some bred heifers that they've developed. Others might be have to be very controlled in the amount of extra females they have because they just don't have the pasture or the feed or resources to keep more than what's necessary. So what criteria can we use to select those? So right off the bat, I think some of that low-hanging fruit, and we saw that in some of the responses people that you've picked, is that you're looking at soundness. It could be the health, just like, was this a chronic? Were they having some health conditions when they're throughout their calfhood? And their temperament, that was noted by everybody, that is something that you're looking at. Another really important criteria ends up being date of birth. And why is that? Well, we know that just because if they're born earlier, they're going to generally reach puberty sooner, and therefore they're going to be able to conceive or breed faster. And then if they're conceive earlier, they're going to calve earlier. We have data, and I'll show you in a second, that there is studies out there that have analyzed heifer data and shown that if you can get that heifer to calve early and her first calving, she'll end up staying in the herd longer, remain in that herd longer. And so I'll show you that on the next slide. What's an effective strategy? Lots of times 90-day calving season is pretty typical for operations. So you could go towards just selecting heifers born in your first 45 days of your calving season. So if you start calving March 1, you can only pick from the heifers born until April 15th. And that might be something that a lot of you are already doing based on, capturing a birth date and looking at that. I would say that when's your calving, go based on your expected calving season start. So sometimes make that be a typical gestation 285, 283 days after bull turnout. And that would be your effective expected calving start date. So we always know that there's females that tend to calve earlier than what you expect to start calving. You might be looking at genetic merit components. So maybe it's just how her mother has performed. You really like how she's turned out in your herd, so you want to keep more of her daughters. Maybe you know the sire. That's easier for smaller operations, but once you start getting a bit bigger, you have multi-sire breeding fields. It's not so easy to know who a calf's sire is unless you're doing the parentage testing. Some operations might be opting for that genomic testing to really get at the inner workings of that heifer's potential. And breed composition, if you have a certain breed cross that you're striving for, that might dictate some of the selection that you're making. And then lastly, I have on here, because I think it always creeps into our selections, is just the visual appeal. That's a really good looking heifer. She's really catchy and fancy. I like that. And you make some of those decisions based on that eye appeal factor. But that shouldn't be your sole or even top criteria, okay? In terms of that data from the first point where I said that we can look at information on heifers and when they calved in their first calving cycle, there's a big study out of the US. They were looking at well over 15,000 heifers. Cushman et al. From about 10 years ago. So the heifers that calved in the first 21 days of the calving season in their first calving, they were compared with heifers that calved in the second and third cycle over a 9-year period or 9 calvings. And you can see that they ended up being in the herd at a higher rate, so higher levels of retention than the heifers that calved later in their first calving. And we found similar results when we analyzed Western beef's data as well. Very similar findings that those heifers that calved early ended up having more pounds weaned over their lifetime and stayed in the herd longer. So how could you do that? How could you help give those heifers a head start? Well, selecting those older heifers, but also doing things in terms of your breeding where you have perhaps a shortened exposure, 30 to 45 days is what some producers are opting to do. Or else maybe it's that you're breeding them a bit earlier than the cows because they have a longer postpartum interval as a heifer, and you want to give them that little bit of a head start to heal up and resume estrus before the start of the next breeding season. Something else that some producers might be doing in order to say, okay, well, how do I even know which heifer's caught in the first 21 days? Ultrasounding for doing fetal aging on, if you can figure out how old that fetus is, you could make some of those judgment calls and only keep those heifers bred in the first 21 days. That might be something that you might think of doing on your operation, and some of you might be already doing that. In terms of cow culling criteria, I think oftentimes we have this as are they open, are they pregnant, and so that's always a top criteria, although people have different rules about that. As we've come to learn through the cost of production network, there's different rules about, well, sometimes second chances are given if such and such criteria, maybe it's a younger female or something like that, or to bug Wilco, it's a 4-H heifer. I'm not sure. I'm just making a jab. I don't know that that's the case, but you never know what can make, sometimes you're giving second chances to some females. Age can be a typical criteria. And when you look to the literature, there's all sorts of ranges of what's a suitable age. And maybe within your own operation, you maybe have some hard and fast age that you cull at. So I can see something, this is from 94, but it was the age of 7 was considered a recommended age to cull at, versus just from a couple of years ago, you could go out as old as 13 was recommended by looking at a bunch of data and doing some modeling. The condition of the female might dictate whether or not she's being sent off your operation. She's just not holding up for the system and how you manage them through the summer and winter. Her body condition isn't as great as the other females. The overall conformation of that, so feet and legs. Milking ability, is it too much, too little? How's the teats looking on that udder? Because you don't want to have something that you're always struggling to get that calf nursing when it's first born. As there seem to be chronic health issues. How's that cow's temperament? I saw some folks pick that as something that's a criteria for them that really matters in their culling decisions. Mothering ability, how they are just as a protective mother. And then using the cow's weight in respect to as a proportion of her calf's weight. Sometimes we say that there's this threshold of having at least 45% of the cow's weight in terms of wean weight. But that would mean that you're collecting those metrics in order to make that judgment call. So we have a lot of different traits that can be of interest for you. This comes right from the Beef Cattle Research Council's website, this table, but it's informed from some publications like the Beef Cow Calf Manual and the Beef Improvement Federation documents. You can see a number of different traits on this table and details about their heritability. And so you can see things like with udder, milking, and foot, you could use genetics as a way to whittle out those problems. So you can make selections away from that or selections for things that you're finding desirable. There's some heritability there. Something like foot rot, it's more of a thing that you correct with management than through selection. Then you'll see cancer eye, temperament, calving interval, maternal ability, vaginal prolapse. The calving interval, so how many days in between each cow's calvings, that's a management, it's corrected with management selection, and so on and so forth. So a little bit of detail to think about which of these traits matter to you, and is it something that has heritability that you can select for? Now I want to just turn to the tail end of my presentation about record collection in general and what records producers, we've already talked about, records that you could be using for heifer selection and culling selection. So showing here again on the heifer side, having the animal ID is something that I say for on both sides. I think it is an important record to have, individual animal ID. Having that birth date in order to make sure you're only picking the ones born in that first 45 days or whatever threshold you're setting for yourself. Knowing who the heifer's mother is to see what her performance is. Look at the performance of the mom. What was the birth weight, weaning weight, and then that heifer's calving ease when she was born. And then on the culling side, just details about the progeny of the cow can help. That was selected amongst the group here as something that's of interest, is just how her calves have performed. Her individual performance then is going to be part of how those calves perform. Health treatments, if there's just been any, again, chronic things that seem to be happening every year with that female that you want her out of your herd because it's taking up time and resources. Conformation issues, temperament, calving interval, and pregnancy status, okay? So this, again, it comes from what Sydney had mentioned. These are notes and descriptions from BCRC's Level 2 record keeping online. So last year, myself and Eric Michaels at the University of Saskatchewan, we've been supervising a young gal by the name of Brooklyn Wong. Brooklyn Braun is her maiden name, and she's from Beachy, Saskatchewan, and she's had some funding from both the Beef Cattle Research Council and the Agricultural Development Fund to do a survey on record-keeping practices and what seems to be helpful for operations. So she did a cross-Canada survey. It started last March, and she had close to 350 survey respondents. Maybe some of you on the call tonight were participating in that survey. And so one of the questions in this lengthy survey of hers was a number of different records. There's actually 39 if you count all the columns on this slide, 39 different columns. And so this is 39 different record points, and we have yes, no, do you keep this record or not? What I've highlighted yellow are the columns that pertain to this previous slide for heifer selection. So they're the data points that could aid in your heifer selection. So we see very high use among these survey respondents. About over 85% have individual animal IDs, and 90% are tracking birth dates on their operation. Dam of calf, so matching the dam to each calf is at 80%. Then we tail off a little bit at calving ease, tracked by a little under 60%. Wean weight, just under 50%, well, just half of the respondents said that's something they're tracking, and then birth weight at 42%. So lower adoption of those weight measures. Now I'm going to add on in my next slide, adding on the cow selection criteria. So you're seeing that sort of in this mint green that's showing up. We see that, so treatment information, so that to look at the health, that's at over 80%. What do we have? Calving scores. We had that as something to look at on the heifer side as well. Body condition score, not very well recorded, just over 1/3 of the survey respondents. Cow weight, less than a quarter. Cow issues, a little over 80%. Udder score, about 40%. And culling reason. So 70% of respondents say that when they cull an animal, they're writing down the reason for that. So you can see if there's something in a cow family or what have you, if there's some sort of thing that's going on, common issue. All right, so I guess that brings me to the end of my presentation. What I wanted to say for hit home messages here, just from closing, I feel that when you're making your heifer selection and figuring out which cows to cull, those are what we call high involvement or high impact decisions. And so you really want to make sure that you are making that decision informed by your own production data. From that record keeping survey, we did see that, record keeping does, what data points are being collected does vary. I was pleased to see that there is strong adoption of records like the birth date and animal ID, but we see lower adoption of things like wean weights on calves and wean weights on cows, fairly lowly adopted, given that those numbers can be used for figuring out what you need to feed your animals or how to assess that wean weight as a percentage of dam weight, or figuring out how much antibiotic to administer. You need to know those weights. I would note that look to that animal ID as a stepping stone to making evidence-based decisions, because you can look at your females individually if you have a unique ID for them. Look beyond the open. What do I mean by that? So when you get to making culling decisions, is there a way for you beyond just whether or not they're in calf or not? And I did some reading and I saw it stated in an article, look for things like bad feet, bad udders, bad attitude. Those are always going to be eating up your time, which is short for everybody, and your resources. You don't want to make those cows that are problem cows, take them out of your herd. If you can, look beyond just what the open is. And how do you do that? Well, perhaps it's because you're tracking them in some sort of list, or you're making some sort of notation somewhere that you can fall back on each fall, or at times of the year where it makes sense for you to make culling decision, because sometimes it ends up being pretty easy when you get to the shoot in the fall and she's in calf. It's easy to forget and forgive at preg check, and you come around another year going, oh, why did I keep that female? So that's the end of my presentation. We'll be shifting to Wilco in a second here. Here's my contact information. If you want to follow up with me on anything that this presentation or anything else of interest that you're interested in chatting me about, there's email and phone number. And I'm also going to mention that I'm working with a number of different researchers on a couple of different surveys right now, one on feed testing and one on swath grazing. You really don't even have to do either practice to participate in this survey, because we want to hear from both adopters and non-adopters of those practices. And I'm going to have Sydney pop the survey links into the chat as well, so that you can take note of them and fill in those surveys. There is honorarium associated with them. So I'd be happy to have producers in Western Canada, just to make sure that's clear, Western Canada fill out those two surveys. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Kathy. That was such a great presentation. I have popped those survey links in the chat, and they will be attached to the follow-up webinar with the recording after, once those get sent out. Just a reminder that if you guys have any questions that come up during these presentations, that you can pop them into the Q&A function, and we will get to them at the end. But I will be introducing our second speaker now. It is Wilco van Meijl, and so I'm just going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, and thanks, Kathy, for all your information that you had for us, and thanks, Sydney. Sydney, can you hear me okay? See my screen all right?
Yep, everything looks great. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you. I'm honored and humbled to be asked here, but I'll say humbled here a little bit. I'll tell you a little bit of a story of how I got onto this webinar here. First of all, certainly not on this webinar because we do everything right at our operation. In fact, the way I got onto this webinar is actually I was in one of the research seminars that Kathy was talking about. And I told some stories, some pretty candid stories about some things that we did wrong or do wrong or have done wrong in the past that probably got me onto this here because I'd say I'm on here today because I'm pretty honest. And so there's a couple stories that I share that I'm going to share with the rest of you that I did share with Kathy. So one was around a 4-H heifer and one was around a cow that had a C-section here at our place. But that's what really got me onto this webinar. But I touch on the fact that I'm honest because honestly, I think being honest with yourself is the only way you'll actually make changes on your operation. It was the same for us. It's easy to kind of BS someone else, but it's really hard to BS yourself, I'd say. And then that's why what my presentation is going to be about, the fact that we couldn't BS ourselves any longer on some of the things that we were doing, that they were still the right things to do for our operation here. So a little bit about myself, our operation. As Sydney said, we're a mixed operation at Rapid City, Manitoba, about 20 minutes north of Brandon. Farm partnership, my wife, Adrian, myself, my brother, Eric, and my sister-in-law, Jamie, and our parents, Cor and Hanny. We have approximately 400 mother cows, predominantly corn and cereal silage for winter feed. We got cash crop acres as well to balance cash flow needs and whatnot. Partnership bought our first large chunk of cattle off my parents in 2017, and then took over the rest of the cattle herd in 2021. I'd say decision-making is done collectively between my brother and myself here. Eric and I are good at bouncing ideas off each other and obviously using our wives as a means of keeping us grounded here. Mom and dad really good at letting us make decisions on everything from bull selection, heifer retention, marketing for a very long time. I'll joke that dad will still come out and grumble about some of the animals that we've kept over the years, not realizing that his criteria was probably a bit looser than my brother and I's. But I guess it's easier to see things in others than it is in yourself. Is a bit of the joke I use for my old man. But honestly, dad helps us out a ton physically, mentally, more than we could ever thank him for, I'd say. But him giving up the reins early on and allowing us to make our own mistakes was incredibly liberating for us. So talk a little bit about, I would say, I guess, our challenge, and really this presentation is a little bit about record keeping and some of the records we keep and how we keep them here. Kathy and Sydney had reached out to me asking about some of the records we keep around our herd, around, as Kathy just talked about, heifer retention, culling, and that kind of stuff. But I'll talk a little bit about the challenge that I'd say we had is as I said, we took on a bit of the herd in 2017, and really our herd was expanding a great deal since Eric and I took it over in 2017. But as the numbers were increasing, so too was the turnover in those animals on the farm. Our marketing approaches shifted as we began selling animals directly in pot loads off the cows because our herd got to a size where we could do that. And we could really no longer remember every cow's history by simply looking at her. That used to be the case for us. We would go out there and know every cow, we'd know the history, all that kind of stuff. But as the numbers started growing, we couldn't do that anymore. And also a contribution was my brother and I, we both work off farm. Actually, all 4 partners work off farm. And so we needed to find a different way to manage our records. This was mostly because we weren't necessarily all in the same place at the same time. And we needed the ability to see what was going on with the farm at any given point in time in any given place. Like, so if I'm at home and Eric's on the farm, he needs to know what's going on and what I know. And it was just an easier way, moving to electronic version of record keeping, was an easier way for us to all be able to see the records at the same time, even if we were in different places. So that was probably the challenge that led us to needing to look at our records a little different. I'll talk about all the things we did wrong, I'll say here, kind of where we've come from. So obviously started, as most everyone does, paper records. We kept individual records of every cow on the farm and every calf she ever had. We had her birth date, who her dam was, who her sire was, every calf she ever had and how easy that calving was. You know, if she lost a calf, we documented that and why. The problem was that each individual record was on a recipe card that was kept in a metal tin in our house. And again, I remember mom would pour over all these records, putting every cow on the recipe card, putting it in the tin. We called them the cards. We said, we always say, hey, you need to bring the cards out when we're making decisions and that kind of stuff. But we joked and said if any of us ever dropped that tin of cards, that mom would for sure kind of have our ass for that, because that was our life of our herd was there. But it was a very manual process, and because it was a manual process, we wouldn't review the cards that often, you know, or easily make links to multiple animals. Like you couldn't kind of click through the lineage. You would see that cow, but then it'd be a lot of work to go and see multiple cows or see the lineage, let's say. But that's where we started, paper records. Another thing I'll reference a few times in this presentation is we made a lot of chute decisions. I call them chute decisions, where you're at the side of the chute, you're working your whole herd through it, and that's when you're making decisions, when that cow is sitting in the head gate of the chute. And again, this is one of the stories that I told Kathy, but as is any producer, loves to hear at preg checking time when the vet yells out bred. You cringe when you hear open, right? It was simple for us. If a cow is bred, keep her. And the story that kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back for us on making too many chute decisions was that we actually had a cow on our farm that, no joke, had 3 C-sections. Because we did all the things wrong that Kathy says that we need to do. We didn't have a culling list. We didn't have a really good system of ear tagging, and our records were all manual. We weren't reviewing them really well. But a cow had 3 cesareans on our farm. And I remember, I don't think I'll ever forget the look of almost disgust on the vet's face when he went to shave this cow and realized that there were 2 scars on this cow already when he was going in there to make the 3rd zipper. And so that was when we said, hey, we got to look at something different. We can't keep relying on chute decisions, because we'll make maybe bad decisions, I'd say. Yeah, like I say, there's a lot of things that we'd say we did at the chute. Heifer selection was one as well. We'd look at heifers in the chute and be like, yeah, let's take her, kind of thing. But that's what I refer to chute decisions. You don't have much data. It's emotional. It's what you want to hear, what you want to see at that given point in time. And we did a lot of stuff by gut feel. Obviously, every producer prides themselves on their gut feel, the type of cattle they want to raise, the decisions they need to make to move their operations forward, the marketing outlook for the year or years ahead. So we keep heifers based on conformation as our top criteria. In our past, if a heifer was like a late calf but looked really good, we'd look at that as a positive. We'd be like, oh man, if she's keeping up with these early calves, she must be awesome, right? And so again, another gut feel or like chute decision that we'd make. But if a cow was open but looked good and was young, we'd give her another shot, feeling that we would get her what we would get for her as a cull cow, and just retaining her would be worth it down the road. And so we did I tell some of these kind of poor management stories, honestly, as I say, because I'm honest. And this is real life for a lot of producers as we're making decisions at this chute, as we're kind of dealing with the heat of what we're trying to bring forward. This is reality. Moving to digital records for us opened our eyes to many of these areas that we were missing on for a lot of years. So I'll talk a little bit about the records we keep. CattleMax, this is not an advertisement for CattleMax by any means, but this is what we use. We chose to partner with them when we went to electronic records. I feel it's incredibly intuitive. At the time, they allowed unlimited entries in it. So for a herd of our size, that was quite appealing, that we could have almost an unending database of information, as there was no cap to the animals. we've kind of been grandfathered in. I think they've changed that a little bit with CattleMax in their pricing structure, perhaps. But we've been with CattleMax for a few years. But that was a big appeal for us. The data we can collect, honestly, it's limitless. When you look at the program, we don't necessarily maximize all of the data we could collect, but they're very responsive. It's quite intuitive. We keep an old school notebook in the barn, obviously during calving time, as I'm certain everyone does. It becomes a little bit of our gospel. We've built an Excel spreadsheet over time that we transfer everything in, and that becomes kind of our go-to for calving, and then transferring that into electronic form. And call me old school, but I can't get rid of mom's old metal tin with the recipe cards. So I still transfer it all in as a bit of a backup, but thankfully we don't rely on that as our only means. So kind of aligning with Kathy's presentation about what we've used as criteria, I would say, for culling and heifer retention. So I'll start on culling or some of the records that we keep on our cow herd here that help us with culling decisions. But the first one is open cows. So again, as I shared, we used to keep open cows. If they were young, looked okay, we would keep them. The straw that broke the camel's back on that was we had my son's first 4-H heifer. So we had her, and again, we stopped keeping first calf heifers that weren't bred a few years before, let's say, and we just said, like, hey, they've had all kinds of time to get bred. Like, there's no reason a first calf heifer shouldn't be bred. And we have been culling first calf heifers for quite a while, until my son's 4-H heifer came through and she was open. But we said, hey, 4-H show day was late in the year. We got her out to pasture late. Maybe that's the reason she didn't catch. Well, lo and behold, she also didn't catch the next year. So again, my brother Eric really was not happy with me. He wasn't happy with me when we kept her the first time, and he was really not happy when she came in open the second time. So that kind of became the straw that broke the camel's back on keeping any cull cows, and so or sorry, open cows. The other thing, again, as we looked through digital records and we were able to see lineage, what we were also finding is when an animal was open or a heifer was open, you go back and there's a lot of times there's a strong correlation to that dam being open, let's say, or the dam having a history of having an open year or something like that. So once we saw that correlation, we were able to see more instances of that lineage, because we were, with CattleMax, I'll show it here. You can just kind of click on cows, and you can just keep clicking and see where you want to go. You started seeing that correlation. And so once we started seeing that correlation a lot more, it made it really clear to be like, open cows aren't helping us here. Let's work on getting our conception up. Let's work on our nutrient program, or whatever it might look like, semen testing bulls, selecting the right bulls, that kind of stuff. Get our conception up and not waste our time with cows that came in open. Our tolerance on problems, again, Kathy talked a little bit about bad udders, bad feet, that kind of stuff. Our tolerance for things like cows aborting, open cows, chronically late calving, udder issues, that kind of stuff really dropped. Again, you could start seeing the correlation to that being kind of driven through your herd by keeping her around. It wasn't helping us. It wasn't making us better like we thought maybe it was. What's the harm in keeping that one cow when you've got 400 around anyway, right? Like, what's the harm in it? But it doesn't help. It wasn't making us better, I'd say. And then older cows. As we started tracking some performance data, like, and I'll talk a little bit about performance data that we look at. It's not as good as like weaning weight, or weaning weight as a percent of dam. But we started looking at things like retained heifers. What groups of steers a steer sold in? Did they sell in the top cut, or heavyweights, or middleweights, or a third cut of steers? Like, where were calves? Where were they performing in? And as we started seeing some of these older cows, we would really start, their performance would really start dipping. And so we started putting, and it was easy for us to get into the one more year mentality. Just give them one more year. Good cow, give them one more year. We started putting some of these older cows in a separate pasture with no bull, so we could sell them earlier. And honestly, some of this was protecting ourselves against ourselves here a bit. from the ever looming, as I talked about, shoot decisions, just, oh, let's just keep her. If we knew that she didn't have a bull with her and she was open, like, okay, made it easy. She's down the road, let's say. And again, stopped us from saying, let's give her one more year. So next slide, I'm going to show you a cow that Eric and I feel is a bit of a poster child for production on our farm. But honestly, we fell into the one more year trap with her as well. As her last calf wasn't very good. Since then, this last summer, she was into the pasture with no bull. But this cow, I'll show you a little bit of what Cattle Max looks like for those of you that might not be interested or not be familiar, and shows what we were kind of looking at. So in this one, what we liked about her, consistent calving. Like if you look at her, she had 12 calves with us. So again, long, old cow, had lots of time with us, but consistently calving. She would calve in the first 2 cycles consistently for us. So that's what we like to see for her. This cow had 7, at one point in time, had 7 active daughters in our herd raising their own calf. So we liked her. She was a cow that would not win any shows by any means. She was an old gray cow, wouldn't win a show at all. But I thought she cranked it out as far as calves are concerned. We wouldn't necessarily go and look out for her calf. The calves would all kind of roll in, but her calves would find their way into the retained heifer pen all the time. And so she was a cow that was really good. Again, in this page, this is the offspring page of Cattle Max. This is the one we probably reference the most, let's say. As you can see on her one steer that was sold, we kind of have the date it was sold, the weight it was sold, the dollars we got for it. From that, I know that's the 3rd cut steer. And so that you can also see that she started dropping off, right? We gave her one more year. This calf that was born in 2021, or sorry, 2022. Wasn't that fantastic, right? So this last summer she was put in the no bull pasture, let's say. So I'm going to highlight this cow here. It's the cow we sold, 2531. So again, within Cattle Max, you can just go, you're on 1727, you just click on 2531 and you go to that animal. So this shows, okay, this is the cow we sold, one of her animals that we sold. She had a first cut, like I know from the date, the weight, when it was sold, and what we sold it for, that was a first cut steer. So as a heifer, she had a first cut steer, and she actually had a heifer that we retained in the herd. But then she had a dead calf. We decided to cull her, let's say. But again, that's Cattle Max. You can just kind of keep clicking through and seeing lineage. And that's when we started opening our eyes. Once you started kind of playing with lineages, you started seeing things show up more recurring than we could with our recipe cards, let's say. So this is I'm just showing that to say how we would kind of click through the animals. Next, I'll jump on heifer retention here and kind of what goes into some of our heifer retention decisions. And again, a lot has changed for us. So conformation, it's a starting point for us. Obviously, we like to look at our cattle. So conformation is still a criteria we place emphasis on. We'll select a larger group of heifers where we can get behind how they develop into cows, let's say. And then we start cutting them on other criteria other than just conformation. So we look at age, and is that kind of a question of fertility, as Kathy talked a little bit about? It's like, maturity for sure. And so does that roll into when they get bred and how long do they stay within the herd? But we used to keep all kinds of heifers from all ages. As I said, we'd have a late heifer, like a May heifer, come in the chute, and we'd be like, man, she looks good. Let's just keep her. But when we began looking at our history digitally, we noticed that if a heifer was born late, it would only be a matter of time that she started having chronically late calves. And looking back on her dam, there was a higher propensity that dam had more late calves than just the one we picked. So now that we've done this, we're finding we're keeping more heifers from kind of no miss cows like the one I just showed, where they're consistently calving in the first 2 cycles. So we started tagging the heifers a different color after 60 days, let's say. And again, that's to protect ourselves against ourselves from the old shoot decisions that would seep in. So if a heifer has a pink tag, we don't care how good she looks. She's not making the pen because date is the criteria. So of our 2020 born females, we had 68 of 78 heifers that we kept that year born in the first 30 days of calving, and all 78 of them were born within the first 45 days of calving. We enjoyed our first ever 100% conception on our heifers that year. Our 2021 born females, which are kind of, I'm used as the picture here on the side, 59 of 69 heifers that we kept that year were born in the first 30 days. Once again, all of them were born in the first 45 days. We had a higher open rate. We had a bull break his penis in the pasture that year, and some other environmental things that hit us. But again, we're confident in that as a criteria for us. Oh my gosh, I'm giving you epilepsy here. I was using on the wrong screen here. Dam history is something that we look at. We go through the dam from a production standpoint. If there's a history of the dam being open, we'll strongly consider culling the heifer. If the dam had a checkered past, we'll cull the heifer. This is a major deviation from our past kind of shoot decisions that we made. If the heifer looked good, let's go, right? Now we're checking back. What was the dam like? Not just from an age standpoint, but if she had a checkered past, I don't care if she's the nicest heifer in the pen, she's gone. And then finally, once we cut those couple things out, we'll do our last confirmation check. We'll then say, hey, how's this package going to look together based on how many heifers we want to keep for that year, given market conditions, desire for growth, feedstock, whatever it might be. But that's then how we choose our heifers. Talk a little bit about benefits of electronic record keeping. I find it incredibly intuitive, visual. You can click through things. You just see whatever you want. Love that. You start to see the big picture of your operation rather than just looking at one piece separate. And you can start to compare progress. As I say, we can look at if you're keeping things like when your steers are sold, what heifers you're retaining, that kind of stuff. You can start keeping some of those production records and comparing how you're doing. Drawbacks, time. It took me a long time to enter the entire herd for the first time. Like, getting started is probably the biggest hurdle to jumping into electronic records, because it takes a while to upload your records. And honestly, it's as good as what you put in there. So garbage in, garbage out. You get out of it what you put into it are the big things that I have from a drawback standpoint. So if you're not updating it, you're not putting in some stuff, you won't get the benefit of it. You could pay the money and not get anything out of it or not glean anything from it. So that's it. I realize we're like a minute off, so the question hour might be a little tight here, but I've got nothing on the end of my night here. So if you got time, I got time to answer questions. But with that, I'll throw it back to Sydney.
Thanks, Wilco. That was so great. I really appreciate the very practical approach that you guys have to this, and it was great to listen to. But you are right. With that and the end of your presentation, we're going to open it up to questions. And so feel free, for those who have any, to throw them into the Q&A function. We will keep answering questions until there are no more. So the first one that I have here, I know you spoke to it a little bit, Wilco, and Kathy, please chime in as well. But what are some tips or considerations that you would highlight to producers when they're trying to pin down the type of record keeping system that works best for them? Recognizing that record keeping is very a personal thing, really, from operation to operation.
Yeah, Kathy, do you want me to go? Do you want to jump in?
Well, if you want to explain maybe what your path and why you ended up picking Cattle Max, then I can add on to it if you want first. But
yeah, no, great question. I think it goes to the last slide I talked about is you really have to find something that works for you. Like, so as I say, garbage in, garbage out, so you can pick whatever program, but if you're not going to input things in there, you aren't going to get the benefit. So you got to find something that's a fit for what you want to see, how you want to see it, as far as a record keeping system. For us, why we picked Cattle Max, I said at the beginning, the appeal was there was no cap on the amount of cattle. So I could have an unending database of animals. Like I could have history. I could have tons of reference animals. Like I could see lineage for a very long time. And when you've got 400 cows, let's say, or a growing herd, that's a lot of animals, and then reference animals and possibly active animals that were in it. So that was really appealing to me for CattleMax. And again, they've been very, like, if you like, they're awesome support. Like if you want to send them a question and I got this problem or I got this challenge, they're super responsive as well. So that was what's important to me. But I think with anything, it's kind of garbage in, garbage out. So you got to find something that works for you.
You know, I would just, yeah, there's CattleMax is one. There's lots of different programs, Herd Tracks, Herdly. If you're adept enough and you've had experience and know how to do it yourself in like Google Sheets or Excel, I've seen all sorts of whatever your comfort level is, and there's always going to be that hurdle of time that's required to get those records in at the start. So, you know, yeah, I don't want to say that I don't want to make an endorsement. I know Western Beef used CattleMax too, but I know lots of operations that have been successfully using other programs like Herd Tracks as well. So it's probably it's like word of mouth, like talking to other people to see what they're doing as well, just to give you some insights, do a little bit of research, just talking with others to see what they're liking.
Thank you both. Our next question is, what's your opinion on heifer retention from cows who didn't have last long in the herd? So as an example, they provided a cow came open as a 5-year-old and her heifer's in the replacement pen. And for this example, they're blaming drought for the heifer being open.
Yeah, my take on that, I'd leave her in the replacement pen. Right, like honestly, in that case, it's not that we then, if a cow comes in open, because again, open rates can vary between 5, 10, 15%, depending on what year you have, what bull problems you have, that kind of stuff. There's different reasons for cows coming in open, right? So if for me, again, we're looking at checkered past. Like I said, we've in the past kept an open cow and then she came open 2 years, 3 years later. I'm like, okay, well, that's a history thing, and then I might not keep a heifer from that one. But in this case, I'd leave that heifer in the retention pen. That cow is open, she's gone. She had 4 years of production for you as well, right? I'd still probably leave her. That my take. I wouldn't say that's a checkered past by any means, as I was referring to. But Kathy, you might have some different perspective.
Yeah, well, if you have that weigh it with that other component where the question had noted that there was a drought situation that it could likely be the factor for the issue with conception. So if her past performance has been good, then yeah, you don't say, well, I'm not keeping her daughter. Yeah, everybody's situation is going to be different, but yeah, given the background that was given in that question, I think that it was the environment that was causing the issue.
Yeah, and why I referenced the percent open is if that then becomes a criteria that just like you nix all the heifers, you've got a pretty shallow pool to pick from, right? And so like let yourself off the hook a little bit when you're selecting some of that stuff. In that case, from now, that cow would be gone, right? But I would probably keep the heifers.
Thank you both. So with the nearly 40 parameters that are listed in the bar chart, I believe this is referring to the data that you're sharing, Kathy, regarding what records producers keep. Recognizing that some parameters are easy and low cost to collect while others are difficult and costly, have there been any studies, whether qualitative or quantitative, with regards to which parameters have the greatest impact on performance and economics relative to other parameters?
Yeah. So I guess, just in what we had for time, part of Brooklyn's thesis is looking at what records producers were keeping, and then how did that influence ultimately what we did use as a measure. And she's still working towards refining her models and hasn't quite defended yet. So I'm not showing the whole story there, but definitely we're trying to look at which records mattered in terms of that producer's confidence and their satisfaction in their product and their overall herds production. So there's not going to be like a dollar impact associated with it, because it kind of gets messy of when you're doing a survey, do you ask producers to tell us what your net returns are? Sometimes people can be very private about sharing that type of information, but we are trying to look to see which records matter, and saying that, you know, confidence in their operations and satisfaction would be correlated with on the right path in terms of productivity and profitability.
Wilco, do you have any comments in terms of some records that perhaps you hadn't kept in the past and noticed an impact on the bottom line after you started keeping them? Or
Yeah, for us, I think it was knowing what your calves are bringing, like what calves are bringing you what dollars, you know, and when you're selling steers and that kind of stuff, is saying, hey, year over year, what are you getting for your calves? What cows are bringing those kind of dollars? Is there some correlation to the cows keep bringing first cut steers, right, or heavy pen steers or whatever? Like knowing who's delivering what has been beneficial for us. Like I say, we could increase the amount of data we take, like weaning weights and all that stuff. We certainly are just, you know, on the beginning edges of the data that we're keeping, let's say. But something that's helped us from an economic standpoint is just knowing who's bringing what to the table.
Thank you. We have a more practical question. So do you keep your cow book in your pocket, or do you put information on a phone or an iPad outside?
So for me, our book is in the barn and travels between the house and the barn. Our Excel sheet is in the house and we update it there. Cattleman's on our phone. Like we are constantly pulling up Cattleman's on our phone. We're looking through if a cow comes into the barn at calving time and there's troubles, or we want to see like what's up with this calf. Has this cow had troubles in the past? We're constantly looking at Cattleman's in season. Whenever we have a question about any cow, let's say we're pulling it up, we want to know her history. We want to know what's up. So that's on our phone all the time.
And Wilco, for Cattleman's, does it require a Wi-Fi connection in order to upload these, or?
No, again, data. Like, so yeah, you got to have internet connection, like let's say, so you don't need Wi-Fi per se, but again, when we'll work out in the barn or in the yard, we're on LTE, but it does need data to, like, because it's web-based, let's say, and you're clicking through, so it's just got to refresh web pages. So not Wi-Fi per se, but you do need data.
We have a question from a new producer. So would you recommend using these database programs for a herd with 25 to 30 cow-calf pairs? I'll post this question to both of you.
No, it's going to be, once you start getting to like a smaller amount, I still think there's value in having your records electronic somehow to like do quick analysis and referring back to. Obviously with a smaller herd and, you know, getting started, congratulations and welcome to the industry, but you want to have that. I still feel there's power in having your data electronic some way. Maybe if you're competent in Excel, you want to stick with it that way. I know Wilco's saying is kind of floating in between those two worlds, with some of it in a database program and some of it is in an Excel, but I'm not sure what the threshold would be that you're going to want to move over into those the software program. I think maybe a little bit, if you're okay with Excel, maybe stick with that for a bit. But if you're not, then yeah, then it makes sense to then use those more intuitive programs where it's managing the data. But Wilco, feel free to add on to that.
Yeah, it might take this. That's a personal preference. I'd say that there's merit to the database programs, regardless of herd size, as Kathy just said. Right? Is this there's advantages to electronic. You can see different things. They're set up for you. Right? It may make you think of things that you weren't collecting. That's what it's done for us, is having you collect things in a different way that lets you see it in a different light, allows you to kind of click through lineage and that kind of stuff, right? And unless you're really, really good at Excel, that's not as possible as clicking through lineage, I'd say. But then it comes down to, what do you want to spend per cow that you have on programs and that kind of stuff, right? So there's all kind of tools available, I'd say, but that would be a personal choice on what's some of the stuff that you want to gather. How do you want to look at it? What kind of time do you want to spend in it? So, but there's merit to it, regardless of herd size.
Those are great comments from both of you. I will also add that your comment on the time that it takes to input this data, especially when you have a larger herd, that time is significantly decreased if you start early with these programs and stuff like that. So if you are planning on growing your herd, as I hope you are, then it's something that if you get on the ground level, it makes it a little bit easier down the line. But moving on to the next question. One of my first heifer selection criteria is if the dam is over 7 years and born in the first cycle. Curious how you rate the criteria. What's most important to you?
I'd say heifer selection is very personal to everybody. As I say, I like looking at my cattle, let's say, but I won't go to be that specific where it needs to be under 7 years or something like that. Like if it fits the mold, if it fits some of the first cut lines that I've got, and she fits in the group, I'll keep her. You know, as I showed the cow that I've had, she was 10 years old and she put a cow into the herd, right? And happy with the cow, let's say. And so to me, it's heifer selection is a combination of a bunch of criteria that comes over time, let's say, and it's just bringing all that criteria together, let's say. And so what's most important to me, as I shared, I like looking at them. Confirmation first. We've figured out that open and age is contribution, and then we go to what's the number we want, and then I say what's the confirmation look like on the gals. Like, so I'm still big on confirmation on females, let's say, and that's probably my biggest criteria when it comes to heifer selection, but sprinkling in some of this other data to help support it. So again, I've cut really nice looking heifers because they were born late or her mom had a checkered past. So I've done that. I've sprinkled that in there, but confirmation is still one of my biggest criteria.
Thanks, Wilco. Another practical CattleMax question. Can you put health information in the CattleMax app and see it on your phone?
Yeah, you can. So you go to an animal, you can go in there, you can put all kinds of health records in there. You can put individual records, you can do group health things, like let's say you're ivermecking or you're scour guarding or you're doing something like that, and you can put group health things in there, you can put individual things in there, and it follows the animal. So again, it's just updating, but all of that stuff goes in there. So again, if you're in VBP Plus as an example, right, it's a great tool to be able to keep all of that records in order for you, to have all that stuff at your fingertips. But 100%, you've got the ability to do that in CattleMax. And probably other things as well. As I said at the beginning, this isn't a commercial for CattleMax. You know, it's what we use. It's all I know. Let's say, but I'm sure other apps allow you to do the same thing.
Okay. And we have a question. Curious how you track what particular calf brought at the sale. When I take a load, I don't know what steer ended up in what sale group.
Again, great question, Megan. Neither do I. And so I just take the averages, let's say, and I say, hey, that load brought this, and these are the calves that were on that load, let's say. And then I do, because again, in my database, I can apply the same value to all the animals, let's say, and that's just what I do. So this group average this weight, this price, and that's what they got. So that's when I say they're a first cut steer, a second cut steer, a third cut steer. That's how I'll know. And again, when you go in there, you can actually name the load or the lot. You can name it whatever it makes sense to you. So I don't know per se every calf and what they brought. I know that group of calves brought this. If I bring a load of steers, mixed steers and heifers to the auction mart, I just put in for those animals that went. Steers average this, heifers average this. Here was the sale ticket, and I apply it to the animals.
Expanding on that, what are other things that you look at in terms of calf performance in order to make some of your replacement and culling decisions?
Good question to me again. Pounds pay. Like I like having a cow that'll bring a big steer in, or a heifer I'd be willing to keep in the herd. You know, that's the cows that I'll migrate to, right? And and now we've got a far stronger understanding of who those cows are and who those cows aren't, right? And so, as I say, our tolerance for stuff has kind of decreased as a result of seeing things at a bigger picture level, let's say. And so let's say there's a cow that's like, I look at them like, she consistently brings a third cut steer, or we've never kept a heifer from her. And now she's got this problem, cull, gonzo, you know, like it's stuff like that. Like, and so those are some of the things that I look for. Like again, that cow that we sold, but it did bring a first cut steer, and we kept a heifer in it. But there must have been a good reason for us to sell her, or she looked at us funny maybe that day, and we put her in the cull pen, the one that I showed. Does that answer, Sydney?
Yep, that answers. Thank you. Kathy, I'm going to ask you a similar question, but in a different way. So what is one type of record that you wish more people kept that not a lot of people do?
Well, that's again, it feels difficult to being so prescriptive on what to do. I was pleased again to see that there's that some sort of ID assigned. I noticed Wilco, he didn't do my alphanumeric thing, but he has some numbering system for his animals, right? I always thought wean weight, like to me, that's just something to be tracking, but even Wilco doesn't do that, but I thought that that's one of these metrics to be tracking as someone that does cost production analysis. That's something I thought would be more closely tracked by operations.
Yeah, if I'd answer that, but like in a way of what I wish we track that we don't track, it's probably weaning weight. It's probably performance off the cow. But honestly, where it comes from is it comes from time. That day, those days are hairy. Like cows come home from pasture 2 weeks before, we're needling we're vaccinating everything before they're weaned and that kind of stuff, and then they're weaning, and then we're sorting into pens and that kind of stuff, and trying to get so that they get on feed right away, right? We're trying to make pen space and bunk space, and making it so that the competition is less, and that kind of stuff. So that day, we're so worried about that we don't go back to the time it takes to weigh each calf individually, let's say, right? And so it all comes down to what you're doing, what you have, or what you think you have time for. So like I say, with my brother and I both working off the farm, let's say, we do a lot of weekend farming when it comes to big things on the cattle. And so there's only a certain amount of time that you got to do certain things, and that's why we don't. Not a good excuse, it's just why we don't. And like I say, it's the data point that I wish we did, but we don't. So
yeah, those are all extremely valid reasons though for why it's not something you do. But having answered all those questions, I think we have reached the end of our question stream. So I just wanted to thank Wilco and Kathy once again. Thank you so much for putting on such a great webinar. Very grateful that you guys took this time out of your busy schedules and your personal evenings to be able to come and share some stories and some really important information. But with that, I'm going to conclude our webinar. So thank you everyone for coming out and joining us. And hopefully we see you at the next webinar. That'll be in mid-February, covering part 2 of our record keeping series. So thank you all and have a great evening.
Great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time.